علي يا مزهر الأجوم.
يلا اوكي اعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين ابو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. ما بعد, Assalamu alaikum to all of you inshallah who are here for today's session of the Nahjal Balagha book club. I can see all of your names in the group, so I want to give like a kind of a shout out, maybe inshallah a little bit later, but thank you to all of the brothers and sisters who are joining, the obviously many familiar names to this book club. And if you recall, today's session is one in which we are now more certain as to where we are going for the rest of this book club. There was a vote last week, a very conclusive vote, I think, in which we were able to understand what issues we want to prioritize for this book club. And as a result, it has given me a chance to draw up a plan to make sure we can cover every topic that has been requested and structure our book club in such a way that we are making sure each reading for every week increases an idea that we are working on. And the idea is to become, inshallah, a true Shi'i of Ali ibn Abi Talib, using his book, using his words, or the book of his words, using many key messages about morality, which I'm going to come to. We have a mission in front of us, inshallah, which is to make the most of this book. And this is only complete with everyone's attendance and participation. So thank you again to all of you, especially for your feedback. Some of you have suggested ways of improving or topics that you like and things like this. It's really helpful. So please feel free to reach out to improve things, because like I said, this group, this book club is for us, inshallah, for you. And this is a space which is made exclusively for the time with Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Okay, today we have set ourselves sermon 189. For those of you who are in the WhatsApp group or who are here, we have mentioned this is what we're looking at for today. This is a really important sermon for the topics we have chosen because it summarizes for us a lot of themes which affect us directly. Okay, the themes of Iman, the themes of Islam, the themes of living in the West, the themes of using Nahjal Balagha, of using the words of the Imam, for respecting the Imam. All these things come up in this sermon. It's a very good foundation to go forward. So if you were able to do the reading, inshallah, make sure you have in front of you or with you like your book or online of sermon 189, inshallah, so that you can follow along in the discussion, inshallah. Just by show of hands, just so I know, who was able to get that done for today? Who did that reading? Just so it would be helpful for me to know. So raise your hand, please, if you can raise your hand, inshallah. Great, thank you, alhamdulillah. And yeah, for those of you, please use the chat or you can raise your hand. Thank you so much. Okay. As for today, let me first break down where we're going so that we are clear as to what this book club is. There was a vote last week, all of you voted, or many of you, and topics like morality and decision-making, tawheed and belief in Allah, and political awareness and government and adl and Quran were these themes that kept coming up. As a result, I have made a plan for us, inshallah, which I'll summarize now, which is where we're going. So if you recall, in the first session, we just introduced Nahjal Balagha, its compilation, what this book is and why it's so important to read. And last week, we looked at tawheed and belief in Allah and sermon 1, and how much it teaches us about how Ali ibn Abi Talib looks at the world and looks at Allah. And from his relationship with Allah, he derives all of his, his beliefs. Let me just spotlight my video, inshallah, to make sure that this is on. Okay. Today we're looking at the foundation of morality and decision making. Where do we make our judgments from? Where do we understand what is right and wrong? What is the unit of morality and moral decision making? We'll look at that today in sermon 189 and establish a really clear foundation, inshallah. And then next week, we'll build on it by arguing what can we use to help us as allies to our own moral decision-making. If it's internal, knowing right and wrong, and it's in the heart and the matter of Iman, as we're going to discuss, where do we get an ally from, a support from external to us to help us in our moral decisions? Once we do this, we will then look at some examples from Nahjal Balagha about in the next session about having firmness of heart, so we stick to our judgments, inshallah, and we are strong in the face of temptation or other ideas and other judgments, so that we really trust our decision making. Inshallah, that'll be the 5th session. After the next 2 on the heart. On the 6th session, we look at the mentality of the one who makes decisions which the Imam appreciates, so his companions. What is the mentality of the followers of Imam Ali alayhi salam? How he praises them for the way that they make judgments and follow through on their actions. We look at a very beautiful saying for that, inshallah. And then the next 3 sessions after that, we will look at applying this moral decision making in different climates. First, with social relations of friends and family. How does the Imam want us to act in that environment? Then we look at social relations in terms of altruism. How does the Imam want us to treat general society using our heart as the basis of knowing right and wrong? Because we live in a society right now where it's not always easy. So how does the Imam help us? And finally, in terms of politics, how do we look at Nahjal Balagha to know how to make decisions when it comes to politics? And then in the end, we'll conclude. These are 10 different sessions, including the ones we've had in the final one. And each one, I have already designated a certain sermon or saying or letter which serves the ideas of the one before and the one after. So I will ask you that if you're in this book club, inshallah, please try and make time to do the reading, because you'll be able to engage with the words of the Imams more imminently and more closely. And the whole point of this book club is when we finish, inshallah, you can continue in your relationship to your Imam by reading the book more. We're just establishing a foundation for making right and wrong. And inshallah, as we'll see today, many of the themes the Imam discusses links to Quran. So I'll draw reference to verses which can be explained by the words of the Imam. Okay, I see it. Muhammad, is your hand raised to speak or just by accident?
No, it's raised. Assalam, bro. Basically, can you repeat those topics again? I was writing some things and then I stopped listening. Can you repeat the topics that we're going to be covering again? Thanks.
I'll repeat the topics. I'm not going to give the sermons because it's a spoiler for each week, but I'll repeat the topics. So we've had one section already on Introduction to Nahjal Balagha. Hang on, I just need to do a quick setting here. There we go. We had one session on Nahjal Balagha already, as number 1 was the introduction. Number 2 was Tawheed, that's its basis. Today's the 3rd book club, which is moral decision making. The 4th book club, the 4th session, inshallah, will be on allies to the heart in making decisions. So support that the heart needs from other ways to help us when we're feeling down or we're feeling not strong. The 5th session is on having a firm and conviction in our decision making, which increases loyalty to the Imam. We'll see what that means. That's the 5th one. The 6th one is on the mentality of the Shi'i who follows this. And the Imam comments on what he describes in some ways the perfect Shia who does this, who actually lives and breathes their decisions for the sake of Allah, and what that looks like. In the 7th, 8th, and 9th, we look at different forms of social relations which we can test our decision making. So in the 7th, we look at family and friends, how we should behave in that climate based on these ahadith. In the 8th, we look at altruism, so humanitarianism and engaging with larger society. How does Imam want us to act in those situations? And in the 9th, we look at politics. So what should political engagement be like? How do we take stances for politics, inshallah? And that'll be in the 9th discussion. And the 10th, we'll have a conclusion. But more than that, we'll be able to see a picture of what the Shi'i looks like. Because now we've gone through so many steps. And the last final session, inshallah, we're able to piece it all together to make a holistic and complete vision of how we want to be. So that'll be the 10th session. Muhammad, was that clear?
Excellent.
Alhamdulillah.
Looking forward to it.
Inshallah. So I'm looking forward to it a lot. So that each one has its own sermons and letters and sayings, which I will set inshallah. And today's was sermon 189, which many of you, alhamdulillah, were able to read and go through. What we will now do is I have split the sermon into 1, 2, 3, 4 different sections with different themes within the sermon. I will quickly go through what the Imam is saying and what it means in each section, and then I will stop at each break, mention the themes, and ask you about your thoughts. Okay? Before I do, let me quickly introduce the sermon and ask all of you for general impressions, if any of you have any thoughts. So for those of you who read the sermon, 189 of Nahjal Balagha, it contains many themes, principally the nature of Iman, the nature of migration for the sake of Allah, Islam and Iman and these differences, and how we know what is right and wrong using them, and the idea of using the Imam when he says Saluni, Saluni, which was the famous saying which is found in this and other sermons where the Imam says, ask me qabla an tafqiduni, before you lose me. And how do we take advantage of the Imam saying this? The sermon has a strong sanad. It's narrated by Tabari, by Sheikh Saduq. It's in 2 of his books, and Sayuti and Tha'alabi and many ulama. So it's found in a number of different sources. So it's pretty solid, and it has good scholarly engagement, which I used in preparing this lecture. So scholars commenting on this sermon or using sections to make points, we have a good engagement. Question to all of you in general, before we go into it. How did you find it? If any of you would like to comment using the chat, or feel free to unmute or raise your hand, I have no problem, inshallah. But like, how did you feel reading this sermon? What did you think? Would anyone like to add any points about how it felt to read the sermon, or what your general impressions were?
A lot of realities came to mind that maybe in the rat race that is the world sort of don't come to the forefront of my mind in terms of decision making and how we should view our world, and how the Imam says tomorrow, but he refers to the Day of Judgment. And I think personally that's something I forget. I mean, it's so soon that the Imam says it's tomorrow. So certain things that came to light, that's just one of them.
Yeah.
That came now to the forefront of my mind, whereas in life, they don't take precedent, such precedent that the Imam is giving here in this sermon.
Definitely, it's a wake-up call, because it's not how we're used to looking at things. And the Imam speaks a very specific way. So you're right. And inshallah, that feeling you have, it continues. There's a comment here by our dear brother Ali Nayari. I struggled to make sense of it. It may be how it was structured on the website. I think I need to take a second look in my Farsi version. Yeah, Ali, looking at different languages does help, but also it's not meant to be easy. There's one point where the Imam even mentions that our case is difficult. Inna amrana ma'bun, no, sa'bun mustas'ab. He says this affair is hard for you. It's meant, we recognize that it's hard. So it is tricky, but that's why, inshallah, we have the chance to discuss it. So thank you, Ali, for mentioning this point. And I would also advise, because these are not long sermons that I'm going to set, like, take your time with them. Maybe read one section and think about it, and then come back to it again, and maybe the themes will come together, inshallah. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Muhammad. Anyone else? Muhammad, were you going to say something just now?
Yeah, but I'm waiting for someone to say something.
No, inshallah, you saying if anyone wants to say, they can either raise the hand or just unmute or chat freely. It's an open space.
The right at the end, I found a little bit difficult. So I'm waiting for your explanation on that, especially it's like the last few lines. And then why is the verse 44, chapter 44, verse 29 mentioned there? And then I went to go look at some of the tafsirs, and I don't know, it just doesn't fit for me. The ending doesn't make sense. Everything else does.
The ending? Which verse was mentioned in the end?
So here in my version, so I didn't use, the online, you sent the link. I used my version here, and it's quite at the end. So it's got Quran 38, verse 3. And then right at the end, it's got 44:29. It's from Surah Al-Quran. So wept not on them the heavens and the earth, nor were they respited. I didn't understand how that quite fit.
The version which you're reading, how does the sermon begin?
Praise be to Allah, whose praise is widespread, whose army is overpowering, and whose dignity is grand. I praise him for his successive favors and his great gifts. Yeah,
that's not the sermon we're looking at today. We're looking at 189 from the link I sent, because there's so many different versions that we want that. I wanted to use that one. Yeah, so if anyone else has also not read that one, then today will be a nice change, inshallah. Yeah, we're not looking at that one. We're looking at the one which begins where one belief is that which is firm and steadfast in hearts. This one. But khair, inshallah, you have the chance now to read it after as well. So that's fine. Okay, that being the case, let's dive into some.
I've read this one. No, it's not too difficult.
You're good, inshallah. You're okay.
Yeah. I have read this one. Yeah.
Yallah, okay. Okay, well, let's begin then. Let's dive straight in, inshallah. For those of you who have it open on the Al-Islam version that we sent, it was Sermon 189. And if you have other versions, you can find them, but make sure you use the Al-Islam to know which one is correct, especially if you're reading in other languages. The Imam begins on speaking about the heart and Iman being a state of the heart, which is our fundamental starting point in our discussion about moral decision making. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَمِنَ الْإِيمَانُ مَا يَكُونُ ثَابِتًا مُسْتَقِرًا في قلوب. One belief, the one which we're going with, is that which is firm and steadfast in the hearts. Iman exists and is steadfast in the hearts. ومنه ما يكون عواري بين القلوب والصدور إلى عجل معلوم. And Iman is something which remains temporarily in the heart, between the heart and the chest, up until a certain time. So Iman exists in the heart. That's where it lives. Belief is internal. And the Imam gives an example to prove to us how important this is, that we look at Iman being inside and not outside. فإذا كانت لكم براءة من أحد. If you want to disassociate from someone, from one person, meaning if you don't like them or you have an issue with them, the Imam says, فقفوا حتى يحضروا الموت فإذا ذلك يقع حد البراءة. He says, wait until the last moment in which they're going to die. For that is the had, that is the limit at which you can do bara'a. Meaning, quite simply put, you don't know what's in their heart. So don't disassociate, don't take that judgment until that final moment in which you see how they have lived. And then you are in a much better position. That is the moment, that is the waqt, he says, that is the ajal, is this time, at that time, hatta al-maut, when you know what was in their heart, because you have seen what came out. Until that point, he says, don't do bara'a, don't disassociate, because you just don't know what's in their hearts. Let me stop here right now. That's only like 3 lines, but we'll stop. Iman exists in the heart. That's our starting point. Okay? This means that decision making, belief, getting things right, wrong, qub and aql, qub and husn, right and wrong, these things are all internal. So if we're looking for the source of decision making, of knowing what is right and wrong, it is inside of us that we decide what is right and wrong. We have a principle in our fiqh which is so established and foundational to our usul, which is husn wa qub aqli, that right and wrong are things that can be rationally known, that you can know what is right and wrong. You can understand, you can believe it. Sometimes you don't even need someone to tell you what's right and wrong. You can figure it out internally. And this part of Nahjal Balagha proves this, or substantiates this view, that Iman is something which exists bayn al-qulubi was-sudur, exists between your heart and your chest. It's inside you. This is really important, because what it helps us to know is that the place where I'm going to choose what is right and wrong, the place where I'm going to either have belief or not have belief, is the heart. And one of the relevant hadith which links to this point comes from our 5th Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, in which he says that the heart, within every heart, there are 3 types. There is the heart which has been conquered for Allah, or conquered by light, he says, by nur. Then there is the heart which has been reversed. Then he says there is the heart which has been neither conquered nor reversed, and that heart is in a state of flux, of change. The example he gives is like a black spot. Some hearts are completely light and have nur in them, which means that person has, beautiful iman, and they have worked on themselves. They've gone through different levels and stages of tazkiyah, like they've really worked hard at themselves to make their heart a place of purity. That's one type of heart. The next type, it's been reversed. That heart has become deadened either by sin or by not listening, or Quran says it is like qaswa or ashaddu qaswa. It's like stone or harder than stone. That heart's gone. It's reversed. No matter what you say to it, it's someone buqyun umyan. It's deaf. It's dumb and it won't speak. There's no sensation left in that heart. And if you see someone who has done so much since they've reached this point, it can exist, unfortunately. But he says there's a third type, and that type is where all of us, I think, might relate to, where the heart is neither conquered for Allah and neither has it been reversed against. It is in a state of change. And if there's a black spot in that heart, he says, that spot is sometimes changing. When one force conquers the heart more than the other, the heart changes. This is where I think many of us will identify ourselves. That sometimes I feel spiritual, I feel religious, I am acting on what I know to be right. And sometimes I'm either weakened or committing sins or making mistakes and not following through on what I should. But my Lord is merciful. And my Lord has said to me that how you're feeling, if you're in that third group, the Imams have spoken about this. And Ali al-Islam is saying that Iman is something ma yakunu thabitun مستقرا في قلوب. It is something which is firm in the hearts. It exists in the hearts like a firm phenomenon. And for our Imam, that's how he was. His heart was for Allah, right? Our sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, says that the heart is the haram of Allah, the sanctuary of Allah, that Allah belongs in that heart. And similarly, our Imam alayhi salam says later on in a different section, Imam bin Ghur al-Hikam, he says, I stood at the gate of my heart and let none in except Allah Azza wa Jal. So for Imam alayhi salam, the heart is the central place where he gets his identity, where he determines who he is, and where he guards with the most treasure that he can have. Okay? The heart is the core. So if we're going to discuss how do I be moral, how do I be right, how do I make the right decisions, and all those things, how do I act with society, my family, my friends, with politics, and all of the good stuff, it all goes back to this internal battle of the heart. And am I able to control between the forces of nur and light and guidance against the forces of dhulm, of oppression and of darkness? And whether or not I am right or wrong depends on where I stand between these two forces. On one, there is aql and reason and enlightenment. And on the other, there is jahl, there is shahawat, there is dunya, there is ignorance and desires. And it's a very clear difference. And I don't need to embody goodness or badness to be considered a believer or a disbeliever. I have to be considered in that third group. And many of us maybe are in that third group, inshallah. Inshallah, meaning that if you accept where you are, that helps knowing where you want to go. Okay? This idea that it's a matter of the heart is found in Quran as well, as the foundation. We read in Surah 49, verse 7. Allah mentions following the Prophet, and he says, Wala Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهُ حَبَّبَ عَلَيْكُمَ الْإِيمَانِ. Allah has made Iman seem nice to you. But where does it exist? Al-Imanu وَزَيَّنَّهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. It has been made beautiful in your hearts. We naturally want Iman. We want belief in Allah. We want all of these things. وَكَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمْ الْكُفْرِ. And kufr, disbelief, has made to seem dirty, and karra has made to seem negative to you. وَالْفُسُوقُ وَالْعِصْيَانِ. Just as wickedness and rebellion going against Allah, these things have already seemed bad in your heart. No one taught this to you. In your fitrah, in your nature, you want to be good. You want to be close to purity and goodness. And you don't want to be close to evil. That's something inside you. What is up to you is your decision making. Which one do I choose? And we will use Nahjal Balagha to know these different groups, to know how to choose between them, inshallah. Okay, let me pause for a second. To those of you who read this section or who are listening now, what would you like to add? Do you agree, inshallah, that this is the fundamental area? And if so, when you hear the Imam speak about the heart, what does it make you think? Has anyone got anything they'd like to share at this point? Inshallah, you can unmute, you can raise your hand, you can use the chat, you can put your video on if you like. But what I'm really asking is, does this sound natural to you? Does it make sense to how you are, that it's a matter of the heart? Does the way the Imam has begun resonate with you? And it's okay to say no, by the way. You might say it's too abstract, that's fine. But how do you see this idea? Yes, Sister Fatima.
I just wanted to say that I think it really does resonate, because obviously we're all born inherently good. I don't think anyone can be born with their kind of life set out in a certain way where they have to be bad, which means that Allah created us in a way that we are, I don't want to say perfect, but we're completely blank but set in the right direction. But yeah, it is quite abstract.
It can be, because these words like light and darkness and that stuff, like, it's not always easy. But you're right. At least we have the potential for perfection inside of us. Like, we can be perfect, we can be all those things, and there's nothing holding us back internally to us, so you are right, inshallah. It also makes me think that we have all the resources inside of us to be good. We need Quran and Ahlulbayt to help us, remind us, but Even if you were to be dropped on an island somewhere, you trust you'll be able to, what is inside is enough to at least be moral, at least be good, and seek Allah and find those things. If that's what you mean. I know it's your point. Exactly. Moral compass, exactly. Is knowing right and wrong. You have it inside of you. I was just manifesting your ideas. That one's for you, Sister Fatima. Ali, for sure, you have a question, inshallah?
Yes. I'm a bit confused. What is the link? Because it talks about the heart, yeah, and it talks about like the firm one and then the one which is temporary. And then it talks about like what you do with a person when you wait till death. What's the link between that? I don't understand why that's in that order, like why that's straight after talking about the heart. Is there a link which I'm missing?
Yeah, so it's not mentioned by Sharif Ravi, the compiler, about how they're linked, but if we follow the logical sequence, the Imam has basically said, number one, Iman exists in the heart. Number two, it's temporary. You know, there is a fixed ila ajal ma'lum. There's a fixed ajal, which means you need to keep Iman in your heart or it will leave. It's temporary. And that's why we said there's a battle in the heart, which you can either be winning or losing. So it's not always the case that once you've got it, you've got it. You have to keep it in your heart and you have to work at it. And third, the fact that it's internal means you can't see it in other people all the time. You don't know what's in their heart because it's inside. Contrast this with Islam. Islam is on the tongue. Islam is spoken. Islam is something which is vocalized. You bear witness with your tongue, but Iman is inside and you just don't know. So the example the Imam gives is if you have an issue with someone and you want to make a judgment against them, you don't know what's in their heart. So wait until the final moment of their death, and we're implying that from now until then, maybe you will see something different in them, or their heart will reveal something more in them, and you'll know something more that you don't know now. Because what you know now is insufficient compared to what's inside of them. Give them a chance to manifest it. Does that sequence make sense to you?
Yeah, so that would that approach apply to if both you have a firm and steadfast heart and a temporary one? As in, you would still look at this approach for people you don't know.
Well, this example is for bara'a, for disassociating with someone. So that's the example which is given for when you want to go against someone. On the other hand, we are told to always give benefit of the doubt for if we don't know, if we are expecting someone has that steadfast heart, we should believe it in other people. We should think the best of one another now, not wait until the end to judge on that. So there's a difference. We think the best in others now, and we think the worst of them after, like if they've proven it in their amal, in their actions until the last moment. So they're different. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Hassan, on this point, and I can see a comment by Aldir Sayyid, but let me quickly just mention a verse of Quran which explains this point quite well. This is from Surah 49, verses 14. So this example, Allah is speaking to the Holy Prophet, and one of the commentators of this sermon mentions this, one of our scholars, to make this point quite clear. He says, قالت الأعراب, say to the Arabs. Also, Allah saying this to the Holy Prophet. By the Arabs, we mean those Bedouins who would come to the Prophet and say, Amanna, we believe in you. But they would not mean it. They just say it for the sake of saying it. In fact, the verse, the tone of the verse is like, قالت الأعراب آمنا. The Arabs who've just said, we believe in you. قل لم تؤمنوا. You've not believed. Tell them, Muhammad. لكن قولوا, instead they should say, أسلمنا. I submit. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ, because Iman had not entered their hearts. They just said it. What they should then say is, I have submitted my heart to Iman. And وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, I follow Allah, I follow the Rasul. لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا. You will not lose any goodness of your actions. Allah will recognize all of your deeds. شيئا إن الله عفو رحيم. Allah is the most merciful and the most kind. Some people said, I believe, but it was just tongue. Allah is telling the Holy Prophet, tell them, don't just say you believe for the sake of me. Tell me what your heart tells you. Has it done aslam? Has it submitted? That is when you have belief in your heart. So here's an example of the difference between Islam, which exists on the tongue only, but Iman, which exists in the heart. We have a point here from Sayyid Khashayar. I personally think it's 100% correct, since even people who claim to be atheists understand that good moral from bad moral, and meaning that what they claim. Yeah, good point. If Islam is on the tongue, a person in their heart can have good qualities without accepting Allah. It's true. There are many cases of non-Muslims who have so many good qualities, and by virtue of their own moral compass inside of them. It's true. We say that the full potential of the heart is Iman. Like if you take it out, what you have been built for, the Imam says you've been created for Jannah. Abu Abdullah says, don't sell yourself for anything less than the value of Jannah. That's how much you can achieve. Now, less than that, I can be a good person. I can be moral. Anyone can be moral. We want more than moral. We want Iman. We want belief, that which is steadfast in the heart. Thabbat, it is firm. That's what we're chasing, inshallah. Okay, very nice points from all of you, inshallah. Anyone want to add anything to this point before we continue? No? Okay. We have a good foundation. Iman is in the heart. And if I'm going to know what's right and wrong, I have to look internally. That's where it begins. Then Imam Ali Islam continues and gives an example about migration and says that, in fact, Iman is so important, it can dictate where you go and what you seek. The example he gives is, وَالْحِجْرَةُ قَائِمَةٌ عَلَى حَدِّهَا الْأَوَّلِ. Hijrah is still in its first position, meaning the hijrah of the Holy Prophet going to Medina. Hijrah now, when he's speaking, is just as important and obligatory on you as it was in its original position. Even though that migration is done, hijrah is over, the last person who was Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, has done his migration, it's done. But it's still in its first position where it's completely essential. ما كان الله تعالى في أهل الأرض حاجة من المستسر العلم والمعلنها. Allah has no need for the one who secretly adopts his belief or openly does so. So what we're mentioning about Iman, whether it's in your heart or said openly, there's no difference to what is in your heart, whether you say it or not. But we are interested right now in what does Iman make you do? And sometimes it makes you migrate because you have to go from one place to another. For example, Imam says, لا يقع اسم الحجرة. Hijrah is not upon the person, on anyone. They should not be doing a hijrah إلا except بمعرفة الحجة في الأرض, except until they know the proof on this earth. The moment you know on this earth who is your Lord, what is your book, you have this hujjah for you, you have to migrate. فمن عرفها أقر بها فهو مهاجر. Imam says it very clearly that the one who knows and recognizes this, meaning has Iman, becomes muhajir. You become a migrant immediately. I'll explain what this means. ولا يقع اسم الاستضعاف. However, some people are deemed weak. They are mustad'af. على من بلغته الحجة فسمعتها. And these people who are considered weak on this earth, sometimes the Imam says they are weak and therefore the obligation of migration does not apply to them, where they reach the proof of Allah and now they have to preserve that proof. What does this mean? The moment this hujjah, you understand and you have Iman, you have to seek that Iman. You have to seek Allah. You have to go on this journey. You can't just stay still. And that means you become a migrant. Not necessarily a migrant from one place to another where you know A and B, but it means you have to move. You have to go. You have to move yourself. You have to migrate yourself. And sometimes that means going to a place to seek knowledge. Or it means if you're mustad'af, if you're weak right now, where you cannot follow your religion, you cannot follow your Iman, you have to migrate to a place where you can follow that Iman. However, to get to that stage, let me establish a couple of things. First of all, migration doesn't just mean moving from one place to another. Migration means moving to Allah. This is a very broad way of understanding migration, but it's needed because all of us right now live in the West. Or those of you who don't live in the West, if you don't, you are engaging with Muslims who do live in the West. Islam has reached the West. It went from Mashriq to Maghrib. It's here now. And that means that we have to preserve Islam and Iman while we're in the West. And Imam Ali Islam is saying, for the person in the West, Iman is the most important thing in guiding where they go. We read in the Quran, وَجَاهِدُوا بِالْأَمْوَالِهِمْ أَنفُسِهِمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Strive and go to Allah. Leave everything behind and struggle for Him. Move. Or we say, فَقِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Flee to Allah. Don't stay still. It's a very important concept. And later on, this applies to the prophets as well. We read in one surah of Quran, فَمَنْ لَهُ Lut, the example of Lut. إِنِّي مُحَاجِرٌ إِلَى رَبِّهِ. I'm doing a hijrah to my Lord. إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. He's the most great and wise. I'm moving to him. I'm migrating towards him. Migration here means when you recognize and you have iman, you then move to seek iman. You don't stay still. And when you seek iman, it means that you want something which you don't have. And Islam is that religion which takes you to that which you don't have. And all of us have to go on this migration where we believe something was right and wrong, and we have to seek it and enact it in our amal. So hijrah here means you have to act. But also it means you have to literally migrate sometimes, which is why there are so many people who have left Muslim countries to come to the West. Because there have been so many waves of migration, for example, in the 70s from Iraq, in the 90s from Iraq as well, because of the oppression that was happening in that country. From Iran after the revolution as well, more people migrated to the West. From India, Pakistan, of course. The history of the Khoja people implies migration, continuously moving. Reverts, people who've converted to Islam, are also in a state of migrating in which they're moving from one place to another to be close to communities sometimes. It's an important part of faith, migration. And with that physical migration comes expectation where you do not leave behind the belief that you left from. The whole point is you cannot leave a place if you aren't sure you can secure your iman on the way. One of the major sins we have is at-ta'arrabu ba'da al-hijra, to become lost or the Bedouin after doing migration, where you have your faith and then you migrate and then you lose your faith. Doing that is a sin because you have abandoned the very reason for your existence. You've abandoned your faith for the sake of movement. It's amongst the major sins to become a stranger after migration, stranger in the eyes of Allah. This is why we can only live in the West if we are sure we can maintain our faith. If not, then it becomes unlawful for us to even be in a non-Muslim environment. That's why it's so important to have iman in your heart, because our climate, our environment around us is not Islamic. And taqiyya has its limits where we are preserving our faith internally. That has a limit. There comes a point where you have to be free to practice your religion in a way in which you are able to be Muslim and your iman is not suffering. Even if you are hiding it from people, you can't be so mubtala, so drowned down in un-Islam that you become un-Islamic inside. Then you're not allowed to be here anymore. It becomes wajib to not migrate. It becomes haram to migrate, to become a Arab, to become a Bedouin. This is really important. Now, I want to continue with the point of mustadaf, but before I do, many of you guys who are, if you're living in the West and you are a Muslim who either migrated first generation yourself, or second generation where your parents migrated, or third generation where your grandparents migrated, in your experience, is it hard to do what I'm describing? Is it hard to have iman in the West, to practice what the Imam is explaining? If no, alhamdulillah, you have found a way, tell us how. But if it is hard, why is it difficult to be a Muslim in the West? What challenges do we face? Shall I feel free to comment or to unmute? Why is it hard to have iman in the West sometimes, to do this hijrah? Why is it, what are the challenges that come from that?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, Fidak.
Yeah, I was just saying, from my personal experience, being a second generation, I think it was hard and easy at the same time, because it's difficult in the terms that every time, especially in schools, university environments, you're constantly surrounded by beliefs and practices that directly oppose Islamic values. So in that sense, it's very hard because you become essentially you're a product of your environment, and those things do affect you. But I think what makes it easy is having a good tarbiyat. I don't know how to explain in the upbringing, good upbringing from your family, and having that constant community, as you said, like idara, like I know you from, having the local mosque, stuff like that. I think Azadari, the whole culture of Azadari here really is what keeps your faith strong.
Ahsantum. Azadari is a very good example of how Imam Hussein brings us together and encourages you to maintain your faith when it's hard. That's a really good point. But of course, because you mentioned community as a solution to this issue, it's not always perfect. For example, there's a comment by Al Said, which is a very good comment, which is that people are writing, so I need to scroll up. I think sometimes racism causes issues, but personally, I try to just surround myself with other Muslims. Sometimes we have racism. We have things in our communities which are not doing what we're describing. It's not helping your iman. It's excluding people. Sometimes it does happen. And that is why finding a right community or finding iman internally is so helpful. And also reforming our communities to stop having these qualities in them. You know, sometimes when ulama speak about this, people get very upset, but it's very important that if we notice racism, or not just racism, any issue in our community which stops us from having this iman, the imam is telling you that you need to have when you migrate. If we're coming to the West and becoming less Islamic or leaving our religion, what was the point in the first place? All the potential about spreading Islam and teaching people and showing how Islam is such a beautiful religion. If we're not actually doing that, then why did we even come in the first place? Or if our previous generations established us and we have this freedom and we are lucky, like Muhammad writes, to be in the West, we need to use that freedom for some good reason, you know? Sister Fatima writes that I tend to see that the Muslims community actually looks down on you for not assimilating to the Western standards, oddly, or trying to establish an Islamic identity too. Exactly, Fatima, you're right. One of the issues, and it's not just community, it's in general, is we have to craft out our own identity in the West, right? And that means being a new thing. Neither are we Muslims in the East, neither are we non-Muslims in the West. We are non-Muslims, we are Muslims in the West, which is a new phenomenon as of the last 3 or 4 generations. It didn't exist before. So sometimes people do judge, or we have issues, or we make the wrong decisions. For example, we're not using our qalb and our aql in the right way. And it is hard to make that space to just be ourselves, where we go home and they don't think that we are one of them, and we are in the West and they don't think we're one of them. So what are we in the end? We have to decide what we want to be and be proud of our heritage and say that, yes, you can be a Shi'i of Ali bin Abi Talib in the West. It's possible. And I'm proof of that by the way I'm trying to act. So I agree with you. It is hard. We have a comment here as well, which is the issues with Ahl Sunnah. Yeah, there are many issues which come up. One of them is other madhabs as well. You are right, which is why a muhajir is someone who is migrating to Allah, not towards disunity as their intention, but towards Allah as their intention. We hope, inshallah, we can, root out disunity through that intention. I also think how you mentioned taqiyya, Fatima Merchant writes, I feel like people find it more necessary to do smaller version of taqiyya in the West, perhaps to the extent of losing parts of religion through time. Good point. So parents might practice taqiyya to the extent of not teaching their kids part of Islam. I agree. I don't know if it's always taqiyya, but definitely there is hiding our religion. Because taqiyya is a certain type of, with a very strict definition and purpose. Sometimes we're just ashamed of being Muslim, or we don't want to frighten people away by being proud of our religion. Sometimes we haven't worked on ourselves to be sure and have that certainty where the Imam says they are thabit, they are firm and steadfast fi qalubihim, in their hearts. Sometimes I'm just not like that. So when the time comes to talk about Islam, because I'm not sure in myself, how can I communicate that to someone else that it's the right religion, or that the religion can exist in a modern society? Like, how can I do that when I'm not sure in myself? So you're right. And of course it can be taqiyya, but I don't think it's always taqiyya. I really think that it is in tarbiyah, as Fidak says. If parents and a community decides that they value this religion, they will communicate it in a way that is actually useful to us, that makes sense, that our minds understand, that we are able to act. But if we're teaching religion in a way which is either too abstract or too far away from our sources, or linked in with other ideologies which are not Islamic, sometimes we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And that's why I think one of the things we all need to do is go back to the origin. And the origin is both the heart and who I am inside, and if I'm making the right decisions. And the origin is Nahjal Balagha, it is Quran, it's the words of the Imam, it's Azadari, it's our fundamental basics, because it's from there that we can deal with all of the other stuff. I really believe that. And That's the point of the book club. Now, the Imam Ali Islam gives an example, by the way, of a group of people who the Quran also expands, who have an excuse for why they were not able, when they migrated, to establish their religion and to practice their religion. And that's because they were mustad'af. They were weak. What does that mean? We read this as an example in Surah Nisa, where we from verses 97 to 98. 96 to 99 actually, but I'm focusing on these verses. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. When the angels are taking the souls of some people who did wrongdoing, they did dhulm to themselves. قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ. They'll say to them, what condition were you in? Like, why did you do these sins? Why have we taken your souls and you've done wrongdoing? قالوا كنا مستضعفين في الأرض. They will say we were weak on this earth. Imam uses the same words of mustad'af in his sermon. That some people, because they are weak, it's hard for them to have this iman when they migrate. Quran says, same group will say, the reason why we didn't have this religion is because we were weak on this earth. And that's why we didn't have this religion. قالوا, so the angels will say to them, أَلَمْ تَكُونُ أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةً فَتُحَاجِرْ فِيهَا. Was this earth not wide enough, and wasi', it's wide enough that you simply would migrate from one place to another? If it's true that you couldn't practice your religion, you were musta'adaf, you were weak, why don't you just move from here? Why don't you go somewhere else where you were free to practice your religion? Don't blame the rulers or the society and say we were influenced by them. Why don't you just go from here and migrate, which is a part of iman? For this reason, فَتُهَاجِرْ فِيهَا فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَأْوَاهُمُ جَهَنَّمُ. For these people, their destination is Jahannam, وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرٌ, and an evil domination. إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ, except those people who were genuinely weak, مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ, amongst the women and the men and the children. لا يستطيعون حيلة ولا يهتدون سبيلا. They were those who were literally not strong enough to go from one place to another. They couldn't. They were too weak or too poor, or Allama Tabatabai says, they didn't even realize what situation they were in around themselves. أولئك عسى الله أن يعفو عنهم وكان الله عفوا غفور. These people who genuinely were too weak to go from one place to another, or they didn't even realize that they have to go and migrate, Allah Azza wa Jal will find refuge in them and will judge them and will have mercy to them. Later in the Quran we read, they are murjawna li amrillah. Their affairs with Allah, He will choose how to deal with them, because they did do sins, it's true, they didn't know. Recently I was in a clubhouse with my dear brother Said Ali Imran. Some of you might know him. He is the editor of Iqra Online, the magazine, and he mentioned this point about musta'adaf. Those who are weak are those people who are sometimes non-Muslim and they're doing sins, but they don't even know that they are sins. Like sometimes we're like, okay, we can't drink alcohol, fine. A non-Muslim is drinking alcohol. Okay, their heart should tell them there's harm in them, but they're not doing a sin according to their heart, according to their mind. It's not a sin in their book. So I can't look at it in the same way as if I was to drink alcohol after believing it's a sin. There's a big difference between these two things. By believing something is wrong or right, that action can become a sin or a good deed for me. And it's my knowledge that determines that. Musta'adhaf are those people sometimes who, think of the majority of people you know in the West, who don't know about Islam that well. Or if they know about Islam, they've heard it from the media about Daesh and oppression and misogyny. That's the Islam they have heard. Of course, they're going to reject that God. That wasn't Allah they rejected. It was an idea of Allah, which we looked at in Sermon 1, which is wrong. In many ways, they are musta'adhaf. There is weakness in the way they learn about Allah. They didn't even know their condition. And it's a shame. But this helps us to know that my duty is to migrate. My duty is to move. My duty is to seek knowledge wherever I can. My duty is to preserve my faith based on the knowledge I have, based on what's in my heart. And Imam Ali is saying, if you have iman in your heart, like if you've done that part where I'm ridding my soul, or I'm ridding my heart from those sins which are taking me away from God and doing all that good work, it will naturally lead me to certain decisions that I have to make for the sake of that iman. And one of those is hijrah. I would sometimes have to move away from a certain group of people, or from some sort of toxic relationships or family or friends or community which is harmful for my religion, and my iman will literally make me move away from them, because iman determines you being a muhajir. Okay. Any questions about this point so far, about how iman makes you a muhajir, makes you a migrant? Is that what is meant by disassociation? Ah, interesting. So even though it follows from that verse, from that section, that might not necessarily mean this means disassociation, because here we are going to Allah. We're not going from something. Whereas in disassociation, you're doing bara to someone to go away from them. Like bari'tu ilallah. In Ziyad Ashura, we mention all of the dhalimeen of Imam al-Hussein, and we say, bari'tu, I leave from them back to God. Right? So, not necessarily, Sister Fatima. I would instead look at it by saying that iman is what makes you go towards Allah. And sometimes that means you have to migrate to Allah, either physically from people who are taking you away from Him, or to a mental situation or to a state of the heart to God in your amal and your actions. But it means you have to move to Allah. That's the priority. I'm going to God. فَقِرُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ, I'm fleeing to God. That's the priority we should look at it with. But thank you for making that point, because it helps to detail it. Yeah, that is a good question. Any other reflections so far about how iman makes us migrants? This topic is interesting to me because I work in the field of migration, of human rights law for refugees and migrants. And I observe many times, whether I'm in places like in Greece or in Calais or in Europe or in Middle East, wherever, where I'm working with refugees, it's not always like this, where they're migrating for the sake of their religion. Sometimes they're migrating because they are poor or fleeing war, and many of these like imminent reasons. Indirectly, it means they can't practice their religion, but they're leaving because they need to live, because they're being killed. And sometimes that means, I've noticed this, that a migrant or a refugee or an asylum seeker or someone who's migrating from country to country, when they enter the West, it's hard for them to keep their deen sometimes, because in the West, sometimes you feel like they want to change you to be more like them. Maybe you've had this feeling where if you were more like a non-Muslim, they'd accept you more. They feel this feeling, migrants. And I've observed they make certain changes where they're trying to assimilate to Western culture, which is not Islamic. So if they're coming from places like Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq or North African countries or Pakistan, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, I know the tradition they're coming from. Like, I know it. And I know areas where they have left behind parts of their tradition in order to be more accepted. This happens. But then I found that when they cross from one border to another and life gets hard, and they are camping out in places or crossing rivers or mountains and like really hard journeys, so often they go back to their religion in those moments as their strength. They return back to their iman as the thing which helps them in those moments, because it is when you are being tested that iman shines, which we read in the next part of this sermon, which I'll come to. And I see it in them. So, and that inspires me, by the way, because I haven't lived through the difficulties that they have gone through. But if I'm doing their legal casework, I'm trying to help them or link them to agencies or whatever, I get motivation from them, that look at how iman is motivating them in such a hard, difficult place. Why can't it motivate me from the privilege of being in the West? Why can't I use the benefits I have here to be better? Like, it gives me that message. And I pray that we can follow these kind of lessons. Migration teaches a lot, but it is hard. It is hard. It's not easy. And that's an important part of iman. The imam continues in the next part of Nahjal Balagha. Inna amrana sa'bun mustas'ab. This matter which I'm describing to you, this case, it is difficult and complicated, he said. La yahtamilhu. You will not be able to bear it. You'll not be able to have this iman. Illa abdul mu'min amtahana Allahu qalbahu al-iman. Except the mu'min, the believer in heart, whom Allah has tried with belief. Allah has tested them. And it's only when they are tested with imtihan, with a test, that they have iman. You get it by a difficulty. ولا يعي حديثنا إلا صدور الإيمان وآمين. Our hadith, the Imam says, will not be able to preserved in anyone except the hearts of the trustworthy, وأخلام رزية, and men or when people of understanding. Nahjal Balagha, the literal traditions of the Imam. You will not be able to hold it in your heart, the Imam says, unless you've been tried. So if you're finding this hard, parts of it are meant to be hard so that you understand it. Parts of this journey are meant to be difficult so that you get what comes at the end. Remember, it's only, the Imam says, in the darkest nights that the stars shine more brightly. We have this hadith in Nahjal Balagha. Some people question its sanad, but the principle is sound. It's only in the darkest night that the stars shine brighter. Or in another example the ulama give, it's only when you heat gold that it shines brighter from the impurities which melt away. It's only when you're tested that you become beautiful. And iman, which exists in the heart, your heart's going to go through many difficulties. Your heart's going to go through heartbreak. It's going to go through dissatisfaction. It's going to be tired and jaded. It's going to become stung sometimes in this path. It's not going to be easy. You're going to feel ghareeb sometimes. You're going to feel like a stranger sometimes. But the Imam says, if you go through this period, you will come back to Allah, because through iman and through the process of continuous migration to God, you will find something you are seeking. And that's the definition of migration, as he says, to seek iman, to continue in seeking more of it. This point I mentioned, I'd like to get your opinion about this, that it's only when you're tested, when you have, the Imam says, imtihan, that you have iman. Does anyone want to agree with this or mention why you agree? Or if you disagree, you can mention why. Why do you think the Imam is saying this? That it's only when you struggle that you gain iman? Maybe in your experiences, what you have seen, why is it that in difficulties we get this strength? You know, why do we have to go through that hardship, in your personal opinion? Why can't religion just be easy? You know, why does it have to go through that difficulty? Go ahead, Muhammad.
There's now please do correct me if I'm wrong. I think we have a tradition from our 8th Imam where he talks about pressure and compares the believer to gold, how the process of gold has to go, it has to be like heated at really high melting points, and it has to go through a rigorous process before it becomes that gold that we buy in the shops that's worth a ridiculous amount of money. It goes through a lot of, like, the human analogy would be trials and tribulations that we suffer in our life. So similarly, the 8th Imam says that for us, we need to undergo these trials and tribulations in order to become the perfect version of ourselves, or the best version of ourselves. And I think it's the verse that he quotes. I think it's like the first verse of Surah Al-Rum, if I'm not mistaken. Do they think they'll believe and they won't be tried? Is that the verse? From the beginning of Surah Al-Rum, and that's the verse he uses, and he explains it with this analogy, which I've not done justice on because I can't remember it word for word.
Yeah, and in fact, even so, beautiful point. Even in the part of Ghulibat al-Rum, that Rome has been destroyed or has been conquered. Some say this is actually a metaphor. And Urafa, I remember reading or coming across a mystical reading of Quran who argued this is a metaphor for how you have subdued yourself and made yourself low in order to be successful. I don't know why that came to my mind so suddenly, but you're right. It's in the words imtahana, which means to purify or to take away impurities. And like you mentioned, all of us really are like golds covered in dirt and minerals and other substances. And the more we are tried, the more those things melt away. But the gold doesn't go. In fact, it shines more brightly. Because like you mentioned, you see it more. And I think this example is seen very evidently in Abu Abdullah. That they say on the day of Ashura, the more that he's tested and tried, and the more the day continues, the brighter his face becomes. Because his imtihan, his test, made him more beautiful and made his face shine more and made him seem more illustrious. in the sight of people, just like we claim to wish in Ziyad Ashura, make me illustrious in the sight of you, Allah, for the sake of this suffering. So yeah, definitely. There's a few comments in the chat over here. From Sayyid, I think it is an exam for us to understand what is our level of belief in Allah. Yes, it's imtihan. Imtihan is also used to mean test or exam in Arabic in normal conversation. Like, how was your test? Kif imtihan in, like, or I have a test, imtihan indi. Like, is a way we just describe any test. And you're right. You need to go through those exams to get those grades. Imagine an exam, and I know those of you who are in exam stage might say, actually, I want this. But imagine an exam where you know all the answers in the beginning. You would never learn anything. You'd get grades, but you'd never gain knowledge. Yeah, so we need those tests. And about this idea of testing, Sister Fatima has added, why is it not instead that you know you have Iman when you are tested, rather than gain it when you are tested? Oh, interesting. So in the sermon, it is in the Mu'min, أمتحن الله قلوب الإيمان. Allah has tried you with belief. So you're saying that why is it not belief? Oh, so I see what you mean. Why is it belief and not gain? One of the reasons why I think this is Sister Fatima is because all we are, if you break it down, is we are our ilm and our amal. Really, we are our knowledge and our action. We are not really the things that we do, except that we know that we do them. We are ilm, we are knowledge, and we are action, and we'll be judged by these things. And the reason why we use knowledge so much, and ma'rifata, and to know, is because the heart is made of knowledge. The heart is contains knowledge. So when you're making a decision or knowing what is right and wrong, what you're really choosing is between what you know and what you don't know. You're choosing between options which are in front of you. Ma'rifah is to recognize what is the right option to take, and recognizing Allah, of course, as the one who is haqq. And you only recognize someone once you know them. And according to this idea, you only know them once you are tested. And it's through that test that you gain more and more ilm and ma'rifah. So that's why knowledge is used, because the resource of the heart is knowledge. And part of knowledge is, of course, love, because the more that you know someone, the more you love them. And Allah Azza wa Jal says in one hadith Qudsi, I'll mention just a part of it because it's a long hadith. Man arafani ahabbani. The one who knows me loves me. They fall in love with me naturally. I mean, that's why it's mentioned like that, from my opinion, but inshallah, you can definitely add to your reflections. Sister Fatima has added serenity, sort of that can be detrimental to the ego. I think it sort of soothes, is to make it that our current state is independent of need of Allah, good, and hardship sort of reveals that ego pushing us to migrate. This is a nice reading, that if you become too, because I use the word serenity, I would use the word complacency, because serenity sometimes has more positive connotation. But when you become too comfortable with your level and you don't want to improve, then you think that I don't need anything. I don't need Allah. I have everything I need inside of me. That person is obviously complacent, and they also ghafla. They are negligent. Once you realize how dependent you are on Allah, you have this urgency that I need to move, I need to gain something, I need to read more, I need to, like, I can't just stay still. And sometimes you have these moments where you just panic, where it's like, I've not done enough. And imagine if I was to die right now, have I really fulfilled my potential in terms of Allah and this world and my mission? Have I got that? No, I need to get moving. So Nahjal Balagha is very inspiring, that everything you have is inside of you. Your sickness is within you and your potential is within you. That heart is there. So fill it with Iman. Don't become complacent. I like this approach, Sister Fatima. Muhammad has added about gold going through a rigorous and a long process to become gold. Like we said, gold itself is not valuable or worthy. It needs the purification process. It goes into a crusher and then a mill, and then gets mixed with water and heated at insane temperatures. And another population is to dissolve it in strong acid. I already read it. Sorry, you said don't read it, Abbas. I'm very curious about gold, but it's a process. That's the main point I get from that. It is a process to purify gold, and you are a process, all of you. You are a subject. You are an entire project. And the moment we prioritize this project in ourselves, we will work on ourselves. But if we are complacent and we don't look at ourselves as this thing that can grow, we won't grow, we won't develop. So I encourage everyone to take yourself seriously, and to myself, inshallah. Sister Elia has mentioned, indeed, innamal usri yusra. So that verse you're mentioning, meaning ease is during the hardship. Sort of adding to Muhammad Ali's point, is through the tests and through trials that you grow more toward Allah and increase your iman. In ease, in my understanding, very good. It is with the difficulty that you grow. Inna ma'al usri yusra. It's not after difficulty, it's not before. It's literally while you're struggling that you're growing. And you feel those growing pains. You feel the difficulty of that journey, like while you're in the middle of it, while you're in the heart of the fire. You're right, Sister Ali. I didn't mention this myself, so I'm glad that you did. It is within the hardship that you grow. Definitely. And that's why it's hard. That's why the Imam says this affair is difficult. It's not easy. And it's only in certain select hearts that you can taste this. And so we pray that we are of those people, inshallah. Some really beautiful points, inshallah. We are coming close to the end. So I'll quickly mention the last part and we'll conclude, inshallah, where the Imam says those famous lines. By the way, if you want to know where to go with all of this knowledge that we are discussing, like what do you do with it? Imam says, Ya ayyuhan nas saluni qabla an tafqiduni. Ask me before you lose me. Ask the Imam for help. He's the one who will help us in this. فأنا بطرف السماء أعلم مني بطرف الأرض. I'm more aware of the affairs of the heavens than the affairs of this earth. The Imam says this so many times. There's up to at least 5, maybe even 6 times just in Nahjal Balagha where the Imam says, Saluni, ask me before you lose me. Take advantage of me, ask me all these things. I am more aware of the affairs of the heavens than the affairs of the earth. He then mentioned an example that there's going to be mischief which is going to spring all around you, which will trample even the nose string and destroy the wits of people. There's going to be around you fitna, which is going to distract you. But he's saying, don't be distracted. Ask me before you lose me. قبل أن تفقدوني, while I'm here. Ask me about the heart. Ask me about iman, about religion, about anything. In fact, it's not just iman. We have Ibn Maytham al-Bahrani in his sharh, in his commentary, says that when Imam says that that I know about the heavens, this just means about religion. It doesn't mean about everything. But Sharif Radhi, who compiled Nahjal Balagha, says no. When the Imam says Saluni qabla an tafqiduni bal ana bi tarq al-sama'a, that I know and I'm more aware of the affairs of the heavens, he means literally affair of this whole universe and the creation and what knowledge Allah has given. The Imam knows about all of it. In one of the places where he speaks and says Saluni, one of the enemies says, how many hairs are on my head? Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. And the Imam says, because that person was an enemy, for every hair on your head there is an angel doing la'an of you because of the sins that you have done. In another place, in Sermon 93, the Imam says, Saluni, ask me before you lose me. And in that one he says that I even know the affairs which are written on the tablets that Allah has given me. He says, my eyes can see the ethereal lines of the events which have not yet manifested. I can see what's happening before it's happening from the ilm Allah has given me. So ask me before you lose me. Take advantage of me, he's saying. In another place, he says, ask me before you lose me. I am more aware of the heavens and the earth. Allah has given me knowledge of all which happens underneath his arsh, underneath his throne. So ask me. But of course, what do? Either people didn't ask him, or they did not take advantage of him, or we have an entire book of Nahjal Balagha in which the Imam has spoken about these things, and I don't pick it up to take advantage of it. So what right do I have to complain that I wish I was there in the time of the Imam when he's saying, ask me, and maybe we have questions which is already answered in Nahjal Balagha? Maybe. That's why I have a duty in my hijrah, in my migration, to move closer to my Imam as well, inshallah, and his book and his words. About this idea of asking before you lose me, I'll ask, inshallah, all of you how you feel hearing it. But a quick point. Thinking and questioning and gaining knowledge by your mind is so important to be a follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He wants people who ask questions and listen to answers and then follow those answers. not blind followers, not people who just replicate what they hear on mimbar or in books without thinking and internalizing. We have to live it ourselves, and we have to ask our own questions, because many times you might be struggling with an idea in your mind that how can Allah do this and I don't get this specific thing. Take those ishqal, those doubts very seriously and fill them with knowledge, like address them. Don't have an issue which you think, Allah is all merciful, it's done. No, like seek answers to your questions. All of our ulama mentioned that they went through these periods, well, not all, but I'd say all of my favorite ulama have mentioned this point, that we went through serious periods of doubt where we just weren't sure about certain things. And then we asked and we gained knowledge and we were able to deal with those situations. And here's my answer to this issue and to that issue. Your Islam should be personalized to you, and your relationship to your Imam should be personalized to who you are. This idea of asking, they say it's found in the West more than in the East, of using your mind and aql and rationality and the Socratic method, asking questions. But no, Sister Rebecca Masterton, she writes in her PhD thesis, don't look to the West for questioning and rigorous analysis. Go to the one who says in the middle of Arabia, Saluni, Saluni, qabla an tafqaduni. He says, ask me before you lose me. To all of you, I want to ask this final question, inshallah, to all of you. All of you are wanting to be Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Certainly, you want that relationship to the Imam where you are his follower and you want to be like his sincere followers. When you hear the Imam say, Saluni, Saluni, ask me before you lose me, how does that make you feel? What can we tell about the Imam, and how does it make you personally feel hearing your Imam say, ask me before you lose me, these famous words? What kind of impact does it have to you personally? I'm very curious about this, and then we'll close, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam fidak. How do you feel when you hear these words?
So I feel mixed emotions. So I think you just see the greatness of Imam Ali at the same time, where he's like, ask me before you lose me. So anything you want to ask, you can ask him. But at the same time, there's this grief that's associated with it, because he had all this knowledge and he wanted to share with the people. But people like you said, Saddam, how many heads on my head? People would come with dumb questions, and it would get to the point where Imam would put his fist into the ground, and it was just, there's so much grief to it. If you understand what I'm saying.
I agree. And like he has a saying where nothing hurts. I think it's a kind soul and a good heart more than to live around those who don't understand it. Imam says, and I think he felt this in these moments where he's literally saying, ask me, and people are like either not saying salam to him or not ignoring him or not respecting his maqam. Definitely it's sad. I thank you for putting those two in together, because they're important. And also, not just you, Said Khashayar has also written proud and sad at the same time. He's like, you feel proud because he's your Imam, right? But you feel sad because he was, we have not done our duty, or as Sister Fatima has written, sorrow as we don't have that direct access to ask. I feel sad at myself that I'm lacking in something. In this case, it might be time. But of course, there are solutions to that. We have an Imam alive today, inshallah, who we can build a relationship with. And we have Nahjal Balagha and words of the Imams and Azadari and links to Ahlulbayt, which help us build that relationship. In fact, your relationship to your own Imam, the 12th Imam, should be a living, breathing relationship where he is as if he is with you. In fact, he is with you. We just have to realize that. And a part of Iman is that you gain more and more knowledge of your Imam. We have this narration, فَمَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَهُ فَقَدْ عَرَفَ إِمَامَهُ. The more you gain knowledge of yourself, the more you learn about your own Imam. Like you get to know him, how he is, and how he feels about us, and what he thinks about our amal, and what he thinks about our potential. And whether or not he's even proud of us in the way that we are trying to follow this religion, like, are we even trying? And the mistakes we make, could I do something differently in my journey? Our Imam is watching all of it. And in Nahj Balagha, there are many sections where Imam Ali Islam speaks about the 12th Imam, and how a part of Iman is to know your Imam as well, and what he's like and how he thinks. And he says in one place that the 12th Imam, he's like a forlorn traveler who he feels sad in watching the state of the people, in the way a traveler looks in front of him and feels sad about what's in front of him. He's distant, but he's so near as well. So we hope and pray, inshallah, that that a part of this sorrow that we have for the Imam, we transfer to action in being close to our Imam, inshallah, and making meaningful steps. Really and sincerely, inshallah. Okay. Thank you, Sister Fatima, for that point, and all of you for your points. Is there anyone wanted to add any reflections or final thoughts or questions before we close about this sermon or about any of the points mentioned? Anything not clear we can clear up before we close? Okay. Okay, so the main theme of this sermon of 189 is Iman is in the heart, Islam is on the tongue. And Iman makes you do certain actions in which you are seeking knowledge of Allah, and sometimes you are migrating for the sake of Allah. And when you migrate or when you go through these different changes, you are tested. And the test, the imtihan you go through makes you more beautiful, inshallah. And in order to support you on this journey, you have Ahlulbayt. In going on with this theme about Ahlulbayt helping you, goes on to next week of the Nahjal Balagha book club. Inshallah, next week we are looking at how in the journey of the heart and in the struggle of the heart in decision making, we have allies in the form of Islam, of Quran, and specifically of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, how they help you in moral decision making. We are looking at sermon 108, inshallah, next week in the book club. 108 in the Al-Islam version. Okay? So if you're using a different version, make sure you corroborate with this one. But it's a sermon in which the Imam speaks. It begins with all praise to Allah, but then speaks about the Holy Prophet being a tabib al-qulubihim, a doctor of the souls, of the spirits, of the hearts. What does this mean? We will look at it, inshallah. So next week at this time, sermon 108, we're continuing with our theme of understanding how the heart is the source of moral decision making and how to strengthen it before we test it in different climates later on in the book club. Ya Allah, okay, that is the session. Thank you so much to all of you, inshallah, for your feedback, and I'll see you next week, inshallah. Ma'as-salam. Fi aman Allah, Khuda Hafiz. Take care. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Good luck with your journeys, inshallah, and I will see you next week for sermon 108. Ma'as-salam. Khuda Hafiz.
علي ولي الله علي ولي الله علي ولي الله